Most students think their SAT problem is that they make mistakes. But that is not the real problem. Everybody makes mistakes. The real problem is when you make the same mistake again and again and again, and you never build a system to stop it. That is when your score gets stuck. Not because you're lazy, not because you're not smart, not because the SAT is impossible to crack, but because your prep is leaking points. You do questions, you get some wrong, you check the answer, you say, okay, I get it now. And then 2 weeks later, the same type of question shows up again, and you miss it again. That is what keeps students stuck. And in this video, I want to show you the roadmap I would use if I were starting SAT prep from zero. Not random practice, not endless videos, not just taking test after test, a real system for turning mistakes into points. Because improvement only happens when you break the cycle. Here is what SAT prep looks like for most students. They do a few random questions, they watch a random YouTube video, then they take notes from somewhere, then maybe they take a full test. And the whole time, it feels like they're studying, but there is no system behind it. No clear target, no pattern being tracked, no mistake being fixed. So the student is busy, but not improving strategically. And that is why random studying creates random results. Now compare that to strategic studying. You diagnose where you are, you learn the exact skills being tested, you practice by question type, you track your mistakes, you review them, then you improve. That is a completely different way to prepare. The goal is not to do more. The goal is to know exactly what you are doing, why you are doing it, and what mistake you are trying to eliminate. So here is the roadmap. There are 5 steps behind it. First, you learn the game. Second, you learn the patterns. Third, you practice by type. Fourth, you turn mistakes into points. And fifth, you test, review, and repeat. That is the full cycle. And notice something important here. A practice test is not step 1. Most students make that mistake. They think SAT prep means, let me just keep taking tests. But if you took a test, get a score, feel bad about it, and then take another test without changing your system, you are not really studying. You are just measuring the same problem again. This roadmap gives every part of your prep a purpose. You learn what the test is. You learn what repeats. You practice intentionally. You convert mistakes into rules. Then you test to measure whether the system is working. Now let's go step by step. Step 1 is learn the game. Before you try to beat the SAT, you need to understand what the SAT actually is. Now the digital SAT has 2 main sections, English and Math. Reading and writing, which is the English section, is 64 minutes. Math, on the other hand, is 70 minutes. So the full test is about 2 hours and 14 minutes, not counting the break. That matters because you are not just studying English and Math. You are studying a specific test format. You need to know how the timing works. You need to know what question types appear. You need to know what tools you have, like Desmos on the Math section. And you need a baseline. Now, a baseline is not there to judge you. It is there to collect data. If you get a score lower than you wanted, that does not mean you are bad at the SAT. It means the test just gave you information. Where are you losing points? Which section is weaker? Which question types repeat? Where do you run out of time? That is the point of step 1. You cannot fix a problem you have not identified yet. Step 2, learn the patterns. This is one of the biggest mindset shifts in SAT prep. The SAT is not a mystery test. It is a pattern test. The exact questions change, but the skills repeat. In reading and writing, you will keep seeing things like transitions, words in context, main ideas, evidence, grammar, and punctuation. In math, you will keep seeing things like linear equations, functions, percentages, systems, geometry, and data analysis. The problem is that many students describe their weakness too generally. They say, "I'm bad at English." That is not useful. A better version is, "I keep missing transition questions because I do not check the relationship between the ideas." Or they say, "I'm bad at math." Again, that is too general. A better version is, "I keep missing functions and percentages." Specific problems can be fixed. Vague problems, on the other hand, cannot. So your job is to stop seeing the SAT as one giant test and start seeing it as a collection of repeatable patterns. Once you see the patterns, the test becomes less scary. Because now you are not guessing, you are training. Step 3 is practice by type. Random practice can be useful, but only for one thing: finding problems. It shows you what you're weak at, but targeted practice is what fixes those problems. Think about basketball. If a player is bad at free throws, they do not just play full games every day and hope their free throws improve. They practice free throws over and over and over. Same idea applies on the SAT. If you're weak in transitions, you have to practice transitions. If you're weak in functions, you have to practice for functions. This is how you build speed and accuracy. You are not just doing more questions, you are training one skill at a time. That is why targeted practice feels less random and produces better information. Every practice session should have a target. Let's say, today I'm fixing transitions, or today I'm improving linear equations. This is how you move from confusion to control. Step 4 is the most important part of the entire roadmap. Turn mistakes into points. Most students waste their mistakes. They get a question wrong, they check the answer, they read the explanation, they say, "Oh, okay," and then they move on. Now, that feels productive, but it is not enough, because the goal is not just to understand why this one question was wrong. The goal is to prevent the same mistake from happening again. A mistake is only useful if it becomes a rule. For example, let's say you missed a punctuation question because you used a comma between two complete sentences. The lesson is not just, "Oh, the answer was C." The lesson is, never use a comma alone to connect two complete independent sentences. That is a rule. And once you create that rule, now the mistake becomes useful, because next time you see a similar question, you have something to apply. This is the difference between leaking points and keeping points. The student who only checks the answer keeps leaking. The student who creates rules starts improving. That is the mistake to points idea. Wrong answer equals data. Data becomes a lesson. The lesson becomes a rule. The rule gets reviewed later, and the review turns into points. Now, let's talk about bad review versus good review. Bad review looks like this. You get the question wrong, you check the answer, and then you move on. And because you feel like you understood it, you think you reviewed. But what usually happens? You forget it. Then the same mistake appears later, and you miss it again. That is not real review. That is emotional relief. You feel better for a few seconds because you saw the explanation, but you did not change your behavior. Good review is different. You identify the question type, you identify why it was wrong, you name the mistake category, you write what you should have done, and you create a never again rule. Then you review it later. That is real review, because it builds a feedback loop. You're not just asking, what was the right answer? You're asking, what habit do I need to build so this does not happen again? That is the difference. Bad review helps you understand one question. Good review helps you improve as a test taker. This is where the tracker comes in. The tracker forces you to slow down and actually learn from your wrong answers. For each mistake, you write the question type. Was it transitions? Was it functions, punctuations, linear equations? Then you write why you missed it. Did you rush? Did you miss a keyword? Did you use the wrong strategy? Did you know the rule? Then you categorize the mistake. Was it a strategy or an approach mistake? A careless mistake? A content mistake, like you don't know the concept or the actual rule behind it, or something else, something unclear. This matters because not all mistakes are the same. If you missed something because you never learned the concept, you need to study. If you missed it because you rushed, you need a process. If you missed it because you used the wrong approach, you need a strategy. You need to follow a playbook for every question type. And then comes the most important column, the never again rule. This is where the mistake becomes a future point. You are basically telling yourself, next time I see this, here is exactly what I will do differently. That is how you stop repeating mistakes. Not by feeling bad, not by just reading explanations, by creating rules and reviewing them. Now, step 5. Test, review, repeat. Practice tests are important, but you need to understand their job. A practice test is not the whole study plan. A practice test is a measurement tool. It tells you where you are. It tells you what improved. It tells you what is still weak. It tells you which question types keep repeating. It tells you where you lose time. It tells you where you panic. But the improvement comes after the test, in the review. So after every practice test, your job is not just to look at the score. Your job is to update the plan. What are my top 2 or 3 weak areas? What question types should I practice this week? Which mistakes do I need to review again? Where am I leaking points? What should I do differently next time? This is how a practice test becomes useful. Not because it gives you a number, but because it gives you direction. Now, let's turn the roadmap into an actual week. This is where most students get stuck. They ask, how many hours should I study? But that is not the best first question. The better question is, what mistake should I eliminate next? Because 2 students can both study 5 hours and get completely different results. One student studies randomly. The other student uses every session to fix a specific weakness. So your week should have a rhythm. First, learn or review concepts. Second, practice by question type. Third, track your mistakes. Then review those mistakes. Then take a full or time test when appropriate. Then, and this is the most important part, adjust the plan for next week. And here's the key. A consistent system beats motivation. You will not always feel motivated. You will not always feel confident. But if you have a system, you know what to do anyway. That is how small improvements each week become real score growth over time. Not overnight, not magically, but through a repeatable system. And this is exactly why we built Tutally around the mistake to point system. Because most SAT prep gives students more content, more questions, more videos, more explanations. And those things can help, but only if they're connected to a system. At Tutally, the goal is simple. Help students stop studying randomly. Help them find their repeated mistakes. Help them fix those mistakes and help them review them. and help them turn those mistakes into points. Now, some students can follow that system independently through the self-paced course on our platform. Some students need more structure, so group coaching gives them live support and accountability. And some families want private guidance, so one-to-one mentorship gives a more personalized plan. But the philosophy is the same. Do not just study more, study with a system. So your next step is simple. After your next SAT practice session, do not just check your score and move on. Use a tracker. Write down what you missed, why you missed it, and what you should have done instead. And then the never again rule. And make sure to review it later, because your wrong answers are not just wrong answers. They are the roadmap. They show you exactly where the points are leaking. And if you fix those leaks one by one, your prep becomes more focused, more strategic, and more effective. And the good news is, we've created a simpler version of the system, the tracker, that you can download and use for free using the link down below. Use it after every practice session, and remember, the goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to stop repeating the same mistakes. That is how you turn mistakes into points.